So, yeah, nice to have a chance. I feel very fortunate to have a chance to be here with you this morning to share some meditation practice and some thoughts on the topic of grieving and sorrow um, and loss. And this is when I was crafting the title for the class, I framed it as sorrow and beyond, beyond sorrow, because this actually is a very central topic in traditional explanations of how to approach training the mind. That at the end of the day, this is kind of the big one, right? This is this big question of our own death, the death of loved ones. It's the most, it's arguably the most psychologically impactful experience that any of us can have. Is the death of another of a loved one, aside from our own death. Our own death is definitely the most psychologically impactful experience in reality, but also the thing that haunts us and kind of lives in the back of our mind and drives this question: how do we make our life meaningful? What are we here for? And is our life on track? And all of these other related questions, they all get wrapped up in this. And so this accumulating things. We spend our whole life generally accumulating knowledge, experience, friends, relationships, money, whatever. And then by voluntarily or involuntarily, everything that we accumulate is dispersed. We give it away, or it's taken at the end when we die. Everything will be taken and distributed somewhere, somehow. That none of us actually own anything. We're just renting. We're renting our body a certain amount of matter. We're renting ideas, making use of them. We're renting a bunch of stuff.
Can I just say, since you
Please.
haven't muted us, that's a very big concept in the historic preservation and architecture, that you are not the owners of the building, you're the stewards of the building, so that you're preserving a cultural identity associated with this place, in the sense, and trying to understand the sense of place, not as something that is possessed by you, but it is somehow shared or possessed by everyone. And living in a historic house, I'm acutely aware of that.
Yeah, place. Who owns a place, right?
Yeah.
Like space, this room. I own this space. Like, who owns space? Space outlives all of us by a long, long, long way. Thank you. That's great. That's great context. And there are a lot of traditional analogies of our body as being like a house. And that we've built this house, right? Like we've built this house in this life, but we're also relying upon the legacy from our parents, our cultural legacy, but as well our genetic legacy. And so our genetic ancestors have also built certain patterns of behavior, right? Like cooperation or competition, and how much of each do you do? And so we have these natural tendencies arise towards cooperation or competition, towards self-centeredness, towards benevolence, towards all of these things arise from our genetics, independent of what our parents might have tried to do with us. And then we have all the stuff that comes from our parents, society, and friends. And in a sense, it's a house that's not, we can say this self, that our body and our mind and this which we all call I, we can say it's my house. It's like my identity. But we have inherited, like Eileen inheriting a historic home, she can't take credit for all of it. None of us can take credit for all of the amazing things that we're relying on. But all of this then factors into to sorrow and a state beyond sorrow. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a bit. So maybe we take a bit of time just to settle in, decompress with some meditation as usual. Just taking a deep breath in and out, beginning to disengage from our normal activities. Meditation has a characteristic of stopping. We're stopping to learn, we're stopping to experience. We take another deep breath in and out and acknowledge that we're stopping to relax. And another breath and acknowledge that we're stopping to refocus, to re-discern what is most important now. We can begin to take stock of this house of our body that we're living in, seeing it as like a building. The roof, walls, beams supporting us, the foundation of our legs and feet, and the empty space inside our body where the wind of our breath flows in and out, ventilating, keeping the space inside our body fresh. We notice the solidity and the strength in our body, like the solid elements, like the walls in the house. We notice also the liquid, our blood and saliva, but also just the fact that our body is flexible and supple, not too dried out. Our body has a flexibility, a softness to it. We notice the warmth in our body coming from deep inside. Perhaps on the surface, our skin may be cool or warm, but deep inside, our body is maintaining this warmth to sustain our life. We notice these winds. There is the wind of our breath coming in and out, but also the wind of all of our other biological and mental processes, the hum and the energy of life inside our body. Our body is like a house, but it is a flexible house, warm, alive. And inside there is the space that we are occupying temporarily. The space inside our body is not truly different from the space outside of our body. When the opening of our nostrils connects this vast outer space with this inner space, we can recognize we didn't create this space. We can't destroy this space. We're simply temporarily appearing in this space. We can go deeper inside our body, allowing us to get a feeling that the body is just like light, like an image, not heavy, but just the nature of light. And that within our body there is a central column or central channel that we can imagine, just like a channel of light, like the central pillar or beam supporting this house. But this too we imagine as the nature of light, hollow. Going deep inside of ourselves, right through the center of our skull, through the center of our neck, through the center of our heart, through the center of our abdomen and navel, our lower belly, down to the very base root of our torso. So from our sex organs down at the very bottom of our body to the very crown of our head, we imagine this continuous channel, like a column of light, hollow, full of space. And in particular, we can allow our mind to settle near the area of our heart. So it is as if we feel this house from inside our heart. If we let our mind settle, this is where we eventually retreat. Every day when we fall asleep, when we're deeply relaxed, when we're with friends or family, our mind settles deep inside our heart. So we allow this shift to take place. If it's easy and comfortable for us to settle into our heart, we just enjoy that. If it feels unnatural or uncomfortable, there's no need to push. But we can just ask ourselves, what is at the very core of my being? What's at the very core of my personality, my body? What's at the very center of this house that I call me? And gently from our heart, we can develop an appreciation for how much we have gathered around us in this life. Our experiences, body, friends, family, capabilities, possessions. In fact, what we have gathered is vast. One of the most powerful things we have accumulated or gathered are habits and patterns of mind, of thinking and behavior. We have accumulated these throughout our life, inherited them from our society and family, and inherited them from our genetic background. And it is these habits that tend to guide us. So we can feel grateful for the habits that serve us, but also recognize that we have an opportunity while we are alive to shift and cultivate those habits and adopt those that will serve us more deeply for the remainder of our life, those habits that will serve others. Then we can develop a strong wish to try to listen deeply and take these teachings to heart, to shift our mind gradually. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. So thank you, Eileen, for the house analogy. It plays into a very traditional set of analogies that are very useful. One of the really useful analogies of ourself as being a house is the idea that we can move. We're not. There's this term, forever home. Is this my forever home? And the so whereas yeah, okay, so just a couple of points to lead off with. There is a traditional saying, the end of rising is falling. The end of the end of meeting is parting. The end of accumulation is dispersion. The end of rising is falling. The end of birth is death. That implicit in meeting is parting. When two people meet, the fact that they can meet implies that there's two people. If it was only one person, they couldn't meet, right? There's two people, so they meet. But implicit in the idea, if for as long as there are two people, they can part, right? The end of meeting is parting. The end of accumulation is dispersion. So when you've brought things together, if there are things that you've brought together, it means that they remain things, like that they're not you, right? You've accumulated them, and they can disperse again. It's not a final state. The accumulation is not a final state. The end of accumulation is dispersion. Dispersion is implicit in accumulation. If you accumulate things, they will they can go away. It's just implicit in it's just what they do. Things move. The end of rising is falling, and whether that's rising in social status or probably the most common, but the end of rising is falling. If something that what goes up must come down, as the saying goes, but it's just a movement, right? It's just a movement. If something moves up, it implies that it can also move down. The end of rising is falling. That all of these things are just movements, and they're not irreversible. So the end of birth is death. This one's interesting. With this, so the end of birth is death. What is birth? I mean, I gave some fundamental explanation previously, but for humans, you take a human sperm cell and egg cell, you put them together, you provide nutrients, moisture, warmth, environment. They cook them up, bake them up. They learn how to replicate and become larger and larger, eventually outgrow the womb and the being that comes into existence. But that being, us, say, who was born, what it is, it's 2 bits of our parents' genetic material. That's it. If you take away your mom's genes and you take away your dad's genes, this is a modern day koan. If you take away your mom's genes and you take away your dad's genes, what do you look like? Do you have dark skin or light skin? Do you have dark hair or light hair? Are you tall? Or are you short? Are you male or are you female? Are you what do you like really if you take away your parents' genetic material? So I missed emphasizing this on Mother's Day, but we do owe a debt of gratitude that transcends anything we can imagine to our parents. The rest of what's accumulated is nutrients, right? That our mom takes in, and so our mom really feeds us and so forth. Anyway, all of this is to say that we are the product of accumulation. We're the product of accumulating genetic material and food, and then when we are born, we accumulate ideas and information and so forth. But because of this, because we are the product of accumulation, it is not too different. The end of collection, like collecting possessions, the end of accumulation is dispersion. The end of birth, which is the bringing together of this genetic material and resources and a body that can survive and so forth. The end of birth is death. And so death is in the very nature of our birth. It is in the very nature of our life. So there's a saying, we may think that we are among the living, but our life is the very highway of death. So it sounds like this thunderclap, occurs if I had a sound effects team here. But the point is not to be ominous or morbid. The point is to know what highway we're on, so you don't get lost, right? You're driving, you're cruising, we're all cruising, right? We know we're cruising. But the first and most important thing you need to do when you're driving is know what road you're on and what direction you're heading in. And I don't mean this to come across as bad news. And someone the other day very kindly said, there's not really any bad news or good news. There's just information, right? So this is not good news or bad news. It's just information. Our life is the very highway of death. Meaning that this is where we're moving. Now, the reason this is an unpopular subject, right, is because we don't like that idea. We like meeting. We don't like parting. We like accumulation. We don't like dispersion. We like rising. We don't like falling. We like birth. Birth's a moment for celebration. We don't like death. Everyone cries at a funeral. Everyone smiles and is delighted at a birth, except for the baby. The baby's crying. Baby's the only one who's really having a miserable time at the time of birth. And my wife quoted this influential spiritual teacher Ram Dass as saying that death is like taking off a tight shoe. To say that the only person who's not crying at the time of death is the person who actually dies. And for them, it's like, you know, you go to sleep. It is like going to sleep. Of course, in the run up to that, there can be pain, fear, and so forth. But the moment of death is this deep absorption, and it is a moment of relief, where the person is no longer trying to hang on, no longer trying to fight, and so forth. And all of this just underscores the fact that our perspective on things can be radically different in the same situation. Right? And so, is death a time for sorrow? Or a time for peace, or a time for celebration? Is birth a time for sorrow, or a time for peace, or a time for celebration? Really, it's up to us. There's no good news, there's no bad news, it's just information. And so even when we deal with other sorrows in our life, right? Because death is just, death is the grand finale to our life. But there's all these warm-up acts, like small losses, small pains, and so forth. We wake up with a headache, wake up in a bad mood, the bad news, lose other friends and so forth around us. We're having a lot of opportunity to practice the experience of loss and change and so forth throughout our life. And the thing is, but the thing is, I can be glib and talk about these things verbally, and being glib is one of my specialties over a long period of my life. But these things are deeper than what can be shared with words, right? These things are heartfelt experiences, and there's something very deep and emotional. I fear, I sense there's a risk of my running over because I'm on time, just because there's a lot more that could be said on these things. But these things are deeply emotional. One thing that I'd noticed over the last few years, I used to go. I didn't even used to take caffeine for a long time in my life. No caffeine, no tea, no coffee, no whatever. And one of the things I noticed is I could control my energies pretty well. Like if it was 9 p.m. and I wanted to keep working for a few hours, no problem. I could work, because I wasn't relying on caffeine for these things. And so I didn't have many ups and downs in my energy level over the course of the day. But I had headaches sometimes, and started taking caffeine. Helps headaches. But I noticed I get pretty tired come 9 p.m. Right. And then also experiencing some sleep deprivation, over, just because of having a lot of early meetings, sleep cycle getting thrown off. And one thing that I've noticed with sleep deprivation and caffeine dependency and so forth is that our moods can be highly dependent on these things. So if I'm sleep deprived, I just notice that I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about absolutely everything in my life. And so sleep deprivation can be like a hidden factor. And I was just pondering about depression, right? Like people who experience depression as a stronger and deeper and more consistent theme. Like everyone experiences sadness, and more or less strongly. But when that theme becomes deep and like a deep tendency and persistent and so forth, there can be other factors, right? So if there's drugs involved or caffeine or sleep deprivation or so forth, those things can make the highs a bit higher, but the lows a bit lower, right? And so it's something where we need to be thoughtful and cautious about understanding that impact. But but even in the best of times, right? Even in the most even-keeled people, there's still, this can be this feelings of sadness, sorrow, and so forth. At their root, sorrow comes, I'll say this, and I'd welcome your feedback later. I've never heard it framed in these ways, but I'll welcome your feedback if this is too harsh or not. But at its root, sorrow comes from taking things for granted, from not appreciating things and feeling that they should last forever, for example, or we should get more than what we have now. And the human capacity for taking things for granted is infinite. We have an infinite capacity for taking things for granted. And that's not an indictment on us particularly. It's natural. It's not us. It's just the way the mind works. Because as soon as you have many things, you can let me perform a magic trick for you here, a small miracle. There's a book that I bought recently from this guy D. Hock that I've mentioned in the past, who created Visa, and his book is entitled "One from Many." Right. So traditionally, one kind of miracle power is turning many things into one. Right. Thinking about Jesus, the miracle that he pulled off was taking one fish or loaf of bread and turning it into many. But it's one category of miracle, turning one thing into many things, turning many things into one thing. We have already done that, and we do that moment by moment when we take the many, 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 many things that we've experienced in our life, our friends, relationships, skills, capabilities, and we turn them into one. We turn them into just me. And what happens, though, when we perform that miracle of going from the me who wanted to be in a relationship to the me who already is in a relationship, for example, we then turn that, those, when previously there was a distance, right? Like us not in a relationship, but wanting to be in a relationship. And then there's a meeting, we meet a friend. Then we turn that into one. We turn that into I. I am in this relationship. I am married. I am, I have kids and so forth. So whenever we use the word I like even the visualization, right? It just looks like a one. It's like a one bar. I. It is the most fundamental thing. Whenever we think I, we roll up all of the infinite things that we've been given in our life, our relationships, our personality, everything we've built up, all the things we've accomplished, and we simplify them down into one thing. And the moment we do that, we take everything else for granted. We forget all of these other things that came up and so forth, and we're on to the next thing. Like we've been in a relationship, and now we want kids. We've got kids, and now we want them to be successful in school. They've been successful in school. Now we want them to get a good job. They've gotten a good job. Now we want them to have, partners and family, and we've gotten our own job, and now we want to be seen as successful in our job. And we're seen as successful. Now we want to be seen as the most successful in our job. And now we're most successful in our job. We want to be the most successful in our field. Now we're most successful in our field. And we want to be, known outside of our field. And it's like our desires are endless. They are endless. They are endless. And every desire implies, implicit in this desire is a lack and a longing and a feeling that we don't have the next thing that we want. And implicit in that is the the possibility of disappointment, that we had something and now we've lost it. And so all of our main general sufferings fall into 7 categories: birth, aging, sickness, and death. These are known in the Buddhist tradition. These are called the 4 great rivers. In India, there are 4 great rivers, right? The Ganges and the Brahmaputra and so forth. The 4 great rivers of our life: birth, aging, sickness, and death. They're kind of what define the landscape, right? Rivers define the valleys and the mountains, and birth and aging, sickness, and death, they kind of define the landscape of our life. And there's 3 other sufferings that we experience: having to part with what we like, having to encounter what we do not like, and failing to satisfy our desires. And in all 3 of these cases, we experience sorrow and suffering simply because our wishes are not fulfilled. We have something we like, we never want to part from it, we never want to lose it, but we lose it, and that was not what we wanted, therefore we're sad. Having to part with what we like, having to encounter what we do not like. We want to never experience anything unpleasant at all, no matter what it is. Not cold, not heat, not insect bites, not unpleasant people, not bad jokes, not noisy neighbors, not air pollution, and yet we have to encounter these things that we don't like. Our wishes are being thwarted moment by moment. We encounter the things we don't like, we part from the things we do like, and we fail to satisfy our desires. So all the other things we don't have, but we want, and we can't get them, and because you wanted it and you couldn't get it, then we become unhappy. And that is incredibly important to understand, that our sorrow is in direct proportion to our wishes, or our desire. And but sorrow itself is a heartfelt experience, right? It's a visceral experience, it's a deep experience, it's an emotional experience. It's not something we can directly control. And so it's not to say, oh, you shouldn't feel sorrow, right? You shouldn't feel grief and so forth. No. You should feel sorrow. You should feel grief. But then you should not be satisfied with that. You should look deeper, and you should ask yourself, where is this sorrow coming from, right? And then you shouldn't be satisfied, even if you say, I do see how this is coming from my own wishes being unfulfilled. But you shouldn't be satisfied with that. You should then think, who else experiences sorrow like this, right? Who else experiences grief like this? Who else has wishes that are not fulfilled? There's a beautiful story. Am I okay to run over for a few minutes? Thank you. There's a very beautiful and traditional story of a woman named Kisagatami. It's a Buddhist story from the time of Buddha. A woman named Kisagatami, and Kisagatami was a young woman, beautiful, from a wonderful family, and everything in her life had gone swimmingly well. And she had a handsome husband, and she had a wish from the time she was a young girl to have a child. And she got pregnant and gave birth to a beautiful, beautiful child. And the child was radiant and healthy, and she felt like finally her wishes had been fulfilled. And she couldn't be happier. Her parents were happier, her husband was happier. Within a few weeks, her child fell sick and died. And Kisagatami was just beside herself with grief, literally driven mad with grief. She isolated herself from her husband, isolated herself from her family, and just held on to the corpse of her baby. And couldn't accept the idea that this baby had died, and started seeking all around their village and community for some way to bring this baby back to life, because there must be a way to bring this baby back to life. And she heard about Buddha, and she heard that this teacher Buddha had miracle powers, had amazing powers. And so she went to see Buddha. Please, please, Master Buddha, you must give me some way to restore my child to health. And Buddha said initially, there is no way to bring your child back. You know, the end of birth is death. And she said, no, there must be a way to bring my child back. And so Buddha said, okay, there is one way. He said, go and bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death. And so Kisagutami was excited, right? She was elated. She was like, fantastic. I found the formula, the potion to bring the baby back to life. So she went down to the village, and she went to the first house, and she knocked on the door. I need a mustard seed from a house that has never known death. And the first house, the woman who came to the door, she's like, I lost my son last year, so try my neighbor. And so she goes to the neighbor, and the neighbor says, my parents just died a few months ago, and so try next door. And so she goes to the next house, and the next house is like, no, my husband just died, a few years back, 10 years back. So she goes from house to house to house to house to house through our village, looking for a mustard seed from a house that has never known death. And so she gets to the end of her village, unsuccessful. And so she comes back to Buddha. And she says, sorry, I didn't expect to. She comes back to Buddha and she says, she returns to Buddha, and Buddha says, Kisagutami, have you brought me the mustard seed? And she says, no. And he says, well, why have you returned? She said, I know you didn't send me, to find the mustard seed, but I have found what you sent me to find. And he said, what is that? And she said, death comes to us all. She said, I know now that death comes to us all. And now I have found peace. Now I'm at peace. And so Buddha said, this is very good, right? This is good. But why have you returned to me? And she said, now please accept me as your student and teach me the way, right? Teach me how to find peace and wisdom and so forth. And so he accepted her as a student, but anyway, goes without saying, a very powerful story. So this is anyway, this is more valuable even than this wisdom is more valuable even than our family, right? Even than those people that we find most valuable. The wisdom to understand how to deal with the reality of life is more valuable than anything else we can find. And so while we may feel unfortunate, right, because we take things for granted so naturally, so instinctively, for as long as we are breathing, right, for as long as we're breathing, we have an opportunity to accumulate wisdom. And that wisdom is what really makes our life most precious, right? This human life is an opportunity for us to accumulate this wisdom and also to share wisdom. And so this is more valuable than all of those things that we thought were so valuable, right? Status, and reputation, and respect, and family, and life going our way, and having, perfect, easy, smooth health. And that the various difficulties that we encounter, like with Kisagatami, these various difficulties, as the saying goes, they may be blessings in disguise, but certainly we can think they are teachings, right? And this is the most profound thing. These four: birth, aging, sickness, and death, they're called the four great rivers, but they're known by another name, which is the four heavenly messengers. They're like messengers from heaven with a special bit of knowledge, special bit of information, special bit of wisdom. And so even the story of Buddha's enlightenment is built around these four heavenly messengers. He himself was a prince living in a palace and sheltered from difficulties of life until he snuck out to see how the people of his village lived and encountered in turn a sick person, an aged person, and a corpse. And then finally, not birth, he encountered a monk. He encountered someone who had stopped giving rise to birth, which is effectively what monks and nuns are doing. They're stopping giving rise to birth. Just as a teaching about anyway, there's a lot there, but these four heavenly messengers are they are teachers, as are all of the other sorrows and sufferings and difficulties and so forth that we experience. And so so we can take this human life as our opportunity to learn deeply from the best teachers we can get access to, including all of our own difficulties, and just take our life as this incredible, not just a highway of death, right? But we take our life as a highway of learning wisdom on the deepest levels. So. Okay, so thank you so much for bearing with me going longer. Yeah, felt like there was a story to be told. Okay, so I'll wind up here, but happy